Good day, everybody. Do you know the reason why a lot of you pastors out there, Sunday pastors out there, pull the Sabbath out of context? You know the reason why you guys pull Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17 out of context? Because you guys don't study the Old Testament. I've heard a lot of pastors, especially Sunday churches, only them alone come with that interpretation that they are New Testament Christian, not Old Testament, so the Old Testament done away with. Do you guys know that in certain cases, you cannot understand the New Testament without fully understanding the Old Testament? And when you guys destroy the Old Testament and said that, oh, it done away with, how do you expect to understand the New Testament? Because a lot of things in the New Testament, you have to have a proper understanding of the Old to begin with in order for you to fully understand the New. But the majority of you, you'll destroy the Old Testament, you'll throw away the Old Testament, you'll reject the Old Testament and say that, oh, the Old Testament done away with, I don't need nothing from there. And then you'll close the Old Testament, you'll shut the Old Testament and focus on the New, and then you'll pull everything in the New out of context. You need to go back to the Old Testament to understand. Now, when it comes to Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, all Jehovah Witness and Sunday churches and all the Sunday denominations out there, pull out of context. You have to have an understanding of the old in order for you to understand what Paul was referring to in Colossians chapter 2. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, drink, new moons, Sabbath days, or of any Sabbath and holy days and so on. Now, what Paul was referring to was not the 7-day Sabbath. You have to go to Leviticus chapter 23, and you have to go to Ezekiel chapter 45, 46, and 47, and you have to go to Numbers chapter 24. So basically, you have to go back to the Old Testament to understand the context Paul was referring to when he says, let no man judge you of a Sabbath day. Now, what a lot of people don't understand up to now, I'm going to get straight to the point, is that beside the 7-day Sabbath, there were other Sabbath given to the children of Israel. There were many Sabbath given to the children of Israel. Now, if you understand that there were many Sabbath beside the 7-day Sabbath, and then you put that in context in the New Testament, you will get to understand in Colossians chapter 2, Paul was not referring to the 7-day Sabbath. Because in verse 17, when he says, these are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So basically what was said previously, they were shadows. So when Paul says, let no man judge you in meat, drink, festivals, holy days, and Sabbath days, these were shadows. He was referring to the shadows, the Sabbath shadows, the drink shadows, the meat shadows. But when you look at those things, only the meat offering was a shadow. Only the drink offering that was pointing towards Christ was a shadow. Only the holy days that were pointing towards Christ were shadows. Only the festivals that were pointing towards Christ were shadows. So in that context, is only the Sabbaths that were pointing towards Christ that were the shadows. The 7-day Sabbath was not a shadow because the 7-day Sabbath was not pointing towards Christ. It was the Sabbath in the sacrificial system that were pointing towards Christ, the sacrificial Sabbaths. Now, what is the difference between the sacrificial Sabbath and the 7-day Sabbath? Now, let me tell you the difference. You have to study the Old Testament to understand better. Now, the 7-day Sabbath, which most people refer to it as creation Sabbath, was instituted in the Garden of Eden. That Sabbath was there before Adam and Eve disobeyed God. That Sabbath was there before Adam and Eve got kicked out from the Garden of Eden. So therefore, that Sabbath was there in existence before Adam and Eve sinned. So before sin entered into the Garden of Paradise, that Sabbath, which is known as the creation Sabbath, which is the same as the weekly Sabbath, the 7th-day Sabbath, it was there a long time since before sin entered into the Garden of Eden. Now, after sin, there was a plan for salvation. And in the plan for salvation, because of sin, came the sacrificial system. So they had to offer animal sacrifices, blood sacrifices for the remission of their sins. And if you study the Bible, you get to understand that in the Old Testament. A sacrificial service or a sacrificial system was established after sin for animals to be sacrificed. And in the sacrificial system came the sacrificial Sabbath. You understand? So, what basically are the sacrificial Sabbaths? Now, the word Sabbath means a day given to rest, a day given not to do any work, to cease from circular labors. Now, those Sabbaths were established. Those are known as the shadow Sabbaths. Those Sabbaths were only there until Christ come. And then after Christ would have come, there would have been no need for those Sabbaths any longer. So those Sabbaths Paul pointed out in Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, especially verse 17, which he said these are shadows of things to come. The 7-day Sabbath is not a shadow, because the 7-day Sabbath falls every week on the 7th day, which we know today as Saturday. The other Sabbaths, they did not fall on the 7th day. They fell on different days. I'm going to give an example. In Ezekiel chapter 46 and 47, there were Sabbaths given, they were known as New Moon Sabbath. Now people will say New Moon Sabbath. So what is a new moon? New moon in the Bible is basically the beginning of months. So every time the month recycles itself, it is known as a new month. But they use the word new moon because it was by the moon that they tell when the month begins. All right, it's not how we do it for today. We are looking at the Gregorian calendar when the month starts, when it's the first. No, it doesn't work that way. All that is a deception. The month begins when the moon recycles itself. That is how God gave timing to those people back then. And God's times and laws have never changed. The papacy, the Roman Catholic papacy, changed the times and laws of Jehovah. But it remains the same because God cannot change. So if you understand the concept of new moons, you will get to understand that in the Bible, every time the month recycles itself, which means a new month, it was automatically a Sabbath. And every new month was followed by a sacrifice. And I will show you proof in the Old Testament in the book of Ezekiel. So those moons, new moons or new months, were followed automatically by Sabbath, a day of rest. But why was a Sabbath given to the children of Israel every new moon? Because every new moon they had to offer up animal sacrifice. It was part of the commandment being under the blood covenant. All right? So remember that. Don't forget. Every new month, it was a Sabbath to offer animal sacrifice. Now, in Leviticus chapter 23, there were special feast days. Now, in the book of Numbers and, the other books, the 14th of Abib, which is the 14th of April, it was the Passover. All right? Now, the day the Passover was killed, the 14th of April, the 14th of Abib, or the 14th of Nisan, it was automatically a Sabbath, which means it was a day of rest because they had to focus on offering up animal sacrifice, and that lamb, it was a lamb they had to offer, and that lamb represent Christ. So therefore, the whole house of Israel, the whole nation, had to take a day off, and that day was known as a Sabbath day to offer up the lamb sacrifice that represented Christ. And that sacrifice was done once a year, not twice a year, once a year, because Christ, the Passover, was sacrificed once, not twice. Now, you have the new moon Sabbath, and you have the Passover Sabbath, and then there were other days given to the children of Israel according to the commandment that God gave them while they were under the sacrificial system as the Sabbath day for them to take a break and take a rest. Now, when Paul said, let no man judge you in Sabbath days in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, he was referring to the Sabbaths that were temporary, not the 7-day Sabbath. The 7-day Sabbath is permanent, but the other Sabbaths were not permanent. They were only there to serve a time until Christ comes. And then after Christ would have come, there would have been no need for those Sabbath days to be observed. And after the death of Christ, those Sabbaths were nailed to the cross. Now, pastors out there who don't study the sacrificial system, who do not understand the sacrificial service, they twist things out of context and they tell you, oh, there is no Sabbath. And they use the 7-day Sabbath that is part of the 10 Commandments, the moral laws of God, and they destroy that just because they don't understand the difference between the weekly Sabbath versus the sacrificial Sabbath. Now that we have established that and have made that clear, the 7-day Sabbath was not nailed to the cross. It was the other Sabbaths, the sacrificial Sabbaths, that were nailed to the cross. The 7-day Sabbath is part of the 10 Commandments, and none of the 10 Commandments can be nailed to the cross because the 10 Commandments last forever. They stand forever. And the 7-day Sabbath is a perpetual covenant that lasts forever. So, pastors, understand the difference between the 7-day Sabbath versus the sacrificial Sabbath. They are not the same. So, with that being said, keep the 7-day Sabbath because the 7-day Sabbath is God's sign and seal to humanity. The 7-day Sabbath was not given to the Jews and the Jews only. If that is the case, then the law of adultery was given to the Jews and the Jews only. So therefore, it was not given to you or your wife. When you tell them something, they then get vexed. Stop being a hypocrite and study the Bible in its biblical context. Stop pulling things out of context. Have a good day.